Well, if you feel like you're being yelled at, put your hand up if I get too loud, because we have a little technical issue with the camera and the microphone. So I'm going to be projecting to you guys like I would do to my students at SFU, who are usually so far up in the landing that I can't even see their faces. So it's nice that I can actually see your faces. How was lunch? It smells wonderful. I think we have lots to be grateful here. It looks like we had lots of people in the kitchen, and I just went to get some water, and the kitchen's already cleaned up. That's pretty amazing. So, yes, thank you for lunch. It was very good. So as you heard, I've been involved with Police Victim Services for some time, and what Police Victim Services does is we are a group of staff and volunteers who work within police agencies responding to people who are victims of crime and trauma. We also have another association that we work with, which is called BC Crime Prevention Association. So the value of us working together is often the people that victim services deal with are a victim of crime, and through the crime prevention piece, we try to avoid or prevent those crimes from happening again. And how we do that is try to educate people who have become victims. What are some of the things they can do to help themselves, maybe help their friends or their families to make sure that it doesn't happen again. So how many of you have ever been introduced or read about something where someone was impacted by fraud? So a lot of people know what fraud is, but sometimes we read about it and we hear about it, but we don't know what to do about it. So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was some of the things you can do to help keep yourself safe or avoid being subjected to somebody who may be trying to harm you in some way or commit a fraud. So traditionally we think of nowadays more and more people are feeling subjected to the vulnerabilities of fraud by their telephones. A lot of people are setting up what they call phone scams. And I think the best way to identify those kind of things and overall fraud is if it doesn't feel right to you, it probably isn't. And if the people who are talking to you can't answer the questions you're asking, then something's probably wrong. So many of the times we deal with people, whether it's in the police station or whether it's in our associations, people who have come because the fraud has already happened. So when we think of how do we go out and how do we stop it, the problem is we have to be educated about it to do something. And a lot of times we find people who are impacted or victims of fraud are embarrassed. And they don't want to come forward and tell us. And I know that I deal with New Westminster Police, and I work within the Emergency Services and Victim Services team. And a lot of times we meet people who don't want their family to know what's happened to them. They don't want their children to know because they don't want them to think that, they don't want them to feel that they should have known better. And a lot of times people who will attempt to harm you or attempt to take things from you, they're usually very skilled at it. It's how they do business and it's how they make money. So when you have it as a business and when you have income on it, sometimes you get very good at it. And many times those types of people are more experienced than you. And we talk in policing about we have to be ahead of them to catch them. And often we're not because the scams graduate so quickly. How many of you use a computer? And how many of you worry about being harmed or attacked through your computer? And what are some of the things we can do to protect ourselves in our computers? What are some of the things we do? Passwords is a great one, thank you. What about, do any of you have what they call virus protection?
Yeah.
Yes.
So we're familiar with those kind of things. What we want to do is think about what would a virus protector look like for somebody who is trying to call me on the phone? What are some of the buffers I can put between me and the person who's trying to get money from my bank account? We can start by asking questions. And as I said, always rely on your gut instinct. And if you're not sure, ask somebody you trust. Even if it means calling a police station. You don't have to identify who you are. But often we can call our friends, we can call our neighbors, and we can ask them, you know, somebody called me today and it seemed like a really good deal. Maybe I want to know more about this, or maybe I want to participate. So ask more questions till you are satisfied that it's legitimate. We're finding that over 87% of people in our public are afraid of being harmed in some way by fraud or an attack through some technology. That's a very high number. There's enough things going on in the world that we know people are subjected to that they're afraid of. Living in fear isn't healthy. And there are some elements of fear that we can't control, but there are some that we definitely can. So one of the things we do is we issue tip sheets, and we issue them around all sorts of things. Phone scams, cyber scams, and I'll give all of the links of the resources that I speak to you about to Fiona to add into her manual that she's building for the end of your trilogy of training. But some of the things we want you to think about is how can you be more vigilant? So if you accept that you're willing to put a virus protector on your computer, what are some of the things we can do when we're face to face with somebody and maybe we don't feel as comfortable? What we want you to think about is the people that you surround yourselves with. And sometimes people in our community, they may come right up to your door. They may come right up to you where you're sitting having coffee. So it's being prepared to ask the right questions. And often we get no warning when the phone rings, and often we get no warning when someone's at our door. So we want you to think so that it becomes your culture. That your culture is not to be suspicious, but it's to come to a place of inquiry. So that you're curious about people who you don't know. And it doesn't mean you have to be afraid of them. It just means you have to be curious. How many of you think of yourselves as curious people? You like to know what's in the box, what's for lunch, what time is the movie coming on. So we want you to be curious like that about fraud. Some of the things that people are subjected to through fraud is your bank account. We have people that are calling people and saying your computer's running a little bit slow and I just need you to validate this for me. And I need you to go onto your computer and do some transactions. And the next thing we know, they have access to your computer. So be inquisitive.
I just hang up the phone.
That's a great idea. Just hang up. If you don't know them, hang up.
Yeah.
And that's because we know more and more, we recognize numbers that we want to call us and numbers that we don't have to answer. That's a choice. But if you don't have that buffer, then we want you to find things to be prepared. How many of you know that in Canada, March is Fraud Prevention Month? Well done. And how did you find out?
I volunteer at the community policing center.
Okay, so it's a big thing for us, isn't it, in the policing world? Because we take that opportunity to get out to the public to say, here's some tips and tools and resources that you can use and that you can share. It also gives us a chance 1 month for every year to talk about it in a positive way as opposed to a negative way. And much like crime, we end up reacting to these things instead of being ahead of them or being proactive. So we try to use March as an opportunity, and every week of the month we have a new theme. The first week in November is Crime Prevention Week in BC. And we have a week of where our Association of BC Crime Prevention, we hold a conference and we invite people to come. And we also have awards that we recognize through the Minister of Justice for all of the volunteers in the province who are doing something, much like at a community policing office, that are doing something to help the public become more aware. So you're starting to pick out some themes in my message. It's about be inquisitive, be curious, ask questions. If you're not sure, talk to somebody. And if something has happened to you, you aren't the first person. Unfortunately, you probably won't be the last. And there is no shame in being a victim or impacted by fraud. So speak about it, talk about it. Don't be alone in your concerns, because the sooner it gets out, the sooner you start talking to someone about it, then the sooner we may be able to stop it from happening to somebody else. So some of the things we do, we have Crime Stoppers, and that's a phone service that you can call in. But the most important thing is, if it's something that has impacted you, call the police, call a crime prevention office or a community policing office and talk about it. Ask them, have they ever heard about any of these things happening? And when people are vulnerable, often we're preyed upon because somebody knows us in our community or somebody has identified us from a list or a group that we're part of. And often that is the group that someone will pry on, or some people will pry on, because they figure that it will be an easy target. So when we look at crime prevention, we talk a lot about target hardening. And we do that when we have vulnerable places. Well, we're suggesting that you think about how can vulnerable people target harden. Part of that, again, circles back to asking good questions. Maybe making sure that you're not putting yourself in a vulnerable place, or that you're not talking to people who aren't familiar with you, or that they're asking you things or asking you to do things that you don't feel comfortable about. A lot of times when people come, even if it's just to sell us paper towels at the door, they want to give us something to make us buy something else. We often feel pressured because they're standing in front of us and they're in our doorway of our house and we don't know how to get rid of them except buy the thing. Or they want to just download their services to us, or they tell us how important it is for their family because they don't have any money and they need you to help them. We need to be wiser. We need to not take everybody at face value, and we need to get comfortable being vulnerable in our space. So what are some of the things we can do to target harden? One of them might be not answering the telephone if you don't recognize the phone number. The other might be thinking about who comes into your environment. Can you control who comes in and who doesn't? Example, a long time ago we had things like peepholes and we had machines and chains on doors that we could control who came and who didn't. But now people aren't always knocking on our door. They're coming through our computers, they're coming through our cell phones, they're coming through us with electronic means, and we haven't all adapted our prevention or our target hardening to meet all these new ways to make us vulnerable. So when you were mentioning the crime prevention office or the community policing office, they have a lot of tools. There's things like consumer protection, and many of you put your hands up around having computers. So as I said, there's many resources that we have that you can relate to with your computers. We want to make sure that whoever you're dealing with, you've done your homework about. Make sure that the people you're buying things from are reputable. And by reputable, we mean they're people that you can trust. They may be companies or agencies that are registered with the Better Business Bureau, or check with a friend. Find out if your friend has ever heard of them. And for those of you who have computers, not that everything you read on Google is correct, but that's a good way to check out who somebody is. And what is the world saying about them? How many of you rate things when you buy something on the internet? You say, yes, I liked this, or no, I didn't like this. So officially or not, it's feedback. And it's one thing that you can do that's free about finding out something about somebody you may want to do business with. The other thing when we think about in BC is being able to make sure that the public knows that there's tools out there. And like I said, we have Crime Prevention Week, we have Crime Prevention Month, we have agencies and resources. But a lot of times when we're trying to educate people, we get it around a theme and people get overwhelmed with all the information that they don't even want to hear anymore about crime prevention. So what we try to do through our associations is break it down into small, manageable pieces, come and chat with people like you and have lunch with you, and just sort of put the message back out there so that it's not associated to any of those events. It's just a group of people coming together to learn something about keeping themselves safe. Fraud isn't the only thing that is the result. Fraud is an act. It has to be defined as a fraud by going through a process. A lot of what happens is attempted fraud, and that's where we're vulnerable. You don't all have to be impacted, but somebody may have attempted to defraud you. So being educated, being diligent about the things that you do, the things that you buy. How many of you shop on the internet? And why do we shop on the internet?
Convenience.
Convenience. And we know it's just going to miraculously appear, and they're going to take our money. We haven't even seen anybody at the cash register, but we know they got our money. We know what day it's supposed to be coming. I got a tracking number to make sure it gets to me. That was pretty easy. Well, how about some of these calls that we get that want our credit card number? Do they come at your convenience, or do they come when you just sat down to dinner? Or you just got up and getting ready to go to work? So they prey on your interruption. They prey on being able to say, you know what, they'll want to just get me off the phone, so they'll probably talk to me, or they'll hang up or not answer. But they get us when we're in a position to be in a sense of urgency. So we want to dispel that. We want you to think about, how do you manage it? When do you let people come into your world of electronic? Or when you sit down at the computer, you're open to the world. So you've already talked about some of the things that you do to protect yourself. We want you to do that in your regular life. And some of the things that we talk about around resources are, how many of you have a Facebook page? So Facebook has a whole page on consumer protection. And they have a whole Facebook page just on resources about protecting yourselves electronically. And I'll add that as a resource. The reason we like that is because it meets people where they're at. It lets you go there when you want to. If something's happened, we also have the Canadian Anti-Fraud Center. And a lot of the things they talk about is crisis response. It's usually when people have called the 188 number asking for help when something's happened. That's great that it exists, but it's reactive. You can ask questions, but they've done surveys, and over 90% of the people who called have been impacted by fraud, as opposed to call to try to find out how to avoid it. So we need to do a better job on prevention instead of reaction. We know that in BC, well, in Canada alone, when I started teaching insurance fraud cost our country between $5 to $10 million. So either I've been teaching a long time, or fraud is getting worse, because now it's $30 million we pay in fraud, that we are impacted by fraud. So that number is escalating rapidly. It's not de-escalating, which means we're not doing a good enough job. It also means that they're getting more and more creative about how they approach us. So if you think about how you could change things, what are you going to think about? Are you going to be curious? Are you going to ask questions? And are you going to be able to know where the tools and resources are that might help you, or help you help your friends when they ask you for help? Because we want you to be proactive, not reactive. We also have some resources around Canada Post. So although very few people are posting letters nowadays, especially at the increase of cost, but a lot of times we buy things through the internet that come through post, and now a new opportunity of fraud exists. So it's coming in the middle. So the parcel's already on its way to you, but now there's been an interception. And sometimes it's the employees of the company, whether it be Canada Post or a courier. So now those agencies have fraud divisions. Canada Post has a fraud investigation group, and that's what they investigate, is people who have intercepted your parcels on their way to your house. So we're looking at how it's evolving, and from that initial crime, we then end up with organized crime. Now it's bigger. Now it's not just about one person, it's about lots and lots of people. And that's what we need to avoid. Because when we hear, especially from seniors and vulnerable people, that it's groups, it's clusters that they will attack. Because when they realize one person was vulnerable, they'll follow up in a circle. And a lot of times it's by the people they see on your Facebook page that they know may be as part of your groups. So think about who sees the information that you give. We have full day courses that we talk about being safe on the internet. You know, how many of you can list to me all of the names of the friends on your Facebook page? How many of you could list for me your true friends in people? So think about, if you can tell me who your real friends are, the people that you love and respect, but you can't tell me the names of all the people who are on your Facebook page, they may not all be your friends. So think about what they see and what they learn and what they know about you, and they're not even in what you call your small circle. So it's looking at how to play safe. The internet's just one. How many of you carry your wallets? And I see lots of backpacks and bags. How many of you have your identification in those wallets? So if I asked you to put your wallets on the table and write down everything that was in it, I get to keep anything you forget or anything that you don't identify in your wallet. I've never done that exercise with my students and not ended up with a whole lot of stuff. And it's usually cash, credit cards, debit cards, or gift cards. Because we carry a lot of information about with us. So think about when you go home tonight, if I look at my wallet, what could I take out of it to keep myself just a little bit safer? What about your PIN numbers to your credit cards? I don't think I've ever done that exercise once that I didn't come up with over 50% of the PIN numbers to the people's wallets, for the credit cards in their wallets. So there's things we're doing that we can change that can keep us safe, just for ourselves. So then let's think about, flip a little bit of gear and talk about what happens if we do become victims. What happens if we are one of the unfortunate group that have been subjected to a fraud and then been impacted by it. Sometimes to a financial loss, sometimes it's to loss of something, or it could be money, or it could be items. So we have different things. In the province, and certainly in the country, we have what we call CVAP, which is Crime Victim Assistance. It's a program for people who are impacted by crime or trauma. When we think of civil crimes versus criminal crimes, we would think of a motor vehicle accident would be something involving ICBC. But that wouldn't be considered part of CVAP, or Crime Victim Assistance. It's more for when people have either witnessed something, been a direct victim of something, or that you're a family member of. And I brought packages for all of you that talk about that. So we want to be able to make sure that if people are impacted by a crime, that one, it gets reported, and two, that a file number gets assigned to it. And the reason for that is the file number entitles you to certain things. And we have in Canada what we call VOCA, which is the Victims of Crime Act, which means every single person who becomes a victim of crime or trauma has rights. And those rights mean you are entitled to information. You're entitled to a file number. You're entitled to services and support for you and your family, and particularly if you witness something. Have any of you ever witnessed something happen to somebody? And do you often think back and replay that in your head, what that was like and how bad you feel? So we know that it's not just the victims that are impacted. And sometimes for families, the families end up having to take care of a person because they've been victimized. So the resources are available. Now, some of you may have heard in Canada, we're talking about a Victims of Crime bill. So our government take it very seriously. And the problem is, if there wasn't so much crime, if there wasn't so much fraud, these agencies wouldn't even exist, but they do. So we need to make sure that people know how to prepare themselves, how to be prepared. And when we think about emergency preparedness, we think about what are the things we're going to do if we have an earthquake. We live in the when, not if province. So when people are thinking about their personal preparedness, it's a very common thing we talk about. How many of you think about what's your personal preparedness plan if there's an emergency? So some of you do. So we need this to be one big picture. Because if you think and your culture becomes being prepared, it makes you more aware. And by being more aware, you're safer. So even if it's things from thinking about with your wheelchairs, what if your bag is hanging from the back of your chair that you can't easily get at, all of your personal property? Thinking about if you have reflectors on it, things to keep you safe. These are things you think about. Well, we just need to build on that and to enhance that preparedness to include things that we may not see in front of us, that we may not recognize as things that we see every day. And hopefully you won't see elements of fraud every day. I know many of the investigations that I've done as a result of insurance fraud, for example, we used to have people who would place themselves and children in a car and then have another car hit it so that they would be injured and they would claim for bodily injury claims. So there's a certain level of sophistication, negligence, and in some people's minds stupidity that would do something like that, but there's money to be gained from it. So if that's what people would do to subject themselves, what about all the innocent people who are impacted by fraud? And when you think of your bank cards and going into the bank, has anybody ever stood too close to you at a bank machine? Have any of you ever felt uncomfortable making a transaction in the bank or at a bank machine? Are all the bank machines that you go to well lit? So maybe what we can do is look for the bank machines that are well lit and that you do feel comfortable going to. And if the one that's close to you isn't, then see if someone can come with you. Just as we started at the beginning, if it doesn't feel right and if it doesn't feel good, it probably isn't. So safety works the same way. If you do a full scan or a full assessment, what you would consider your personal vulnerabilities? Maybe it's mobility. Maybe it's the ability to not call for help if you needed it. So think about what kind of assessment can you make? What are your challenges around communication? So what are some of the things you can do when you're outside or talking on the phone that would make your communication level enlighten it by being more confident? If it's your mobility, what are some of the assessments you can make that would make you more comfortable in situations that would make you feel that you had done something to address vulnerabilities related to mobility? And it's the same thing with transportation. How many of you would take like a handy dart or some mode of transportation by someone who drives that you do not know? So what are some of the things we can do to make sure that you feel comfortable? So it is a sense of emergency planning and preparedness, but it's a culture. If you think of doing it in one area, you may see yourself doing it in others. So we want you to be able to look at the big picture and to be able to find out when there's resources available, how do you tap into them? Would you be willing to share them if you thought something was really good and very useful? How could you share it? What would your communication be? And it sounds like your association is willing to communicate some of them. It might be that when you have one of your lunches, you talk about something that you heard that happened to somebody so that we can all share and we can learn that that could be something we would be subjected to. And if we have a chance to be proactive about it, then maybe we'll all learn. How many of you get educated about fraud or crime in your community by reading the internet? What about the TV? The radio? And is everything we read on the internet and on the TV accurate? Not very often. So we don't want you to be educated by the wrong source of media. We want you to get information from qualified people, qualified or respected agencies, and their business is to provide you with tools to keep you safe. Often people are educated from the wrong sources. And when I talk about people being vulnerable, I talk about there's groups of people who target vulnerable groups because they know that the chances are they'll be able to sell themselves as being someone who's trustworthy. And if we don't come from a place of curious and we don't ask the right questions or just ask any question, then often we do become subjected to further harm. So we want you to get information that's relevant. We want you to be able to apply the knowledge. So if it means looking for a new bank machine, if it means taking things out of your wallet, if it means not answering the telephone or asking different questions when we do, these are some of the things we want you to think about. And if something has happened, we want you to be comfortable making a report. We want you to make sure that you take advantage of getting an application and filling it out for the costs that you've incurred as a result of that crime. It's paid through the Ministry of Justice. It's an adjudication process. It's by no means a quick fix, and it by no means will replace everything you lost. It's not insurance. It's an assistance program that assesses the impact of your loss. And for some people, it can be as traumatic as needing counseling because of what's happened to them. It could mean that their family need counseling. It could be that their house or their family home has to be retrofitted to accommodate the changes in their life as a result of the crime. So we want you to have these tools. They exist. But a lot of times, and certainly with Police Victim Services, I can assure you, people don't know about us until something bad has happened. We're not the kind of service that we can market. So when we have an opportunity to come out and talk to people, to remind them that there's things you can do, that you can take accountability, that you can be empowered to learn things on your own, and that if you don't know how to do it on your own, you know who to call for help. And when I think of emergency preparedness, I think of, have any of you ever seen those little whistles? And it's a keyless whistle, it has a little compass on it, a thermostat, and sometimes they glow in the dark. That's the best thing to remind you of personal safety. There's a whistle to know when to call for help. There's a thermometer to always check yourself and make sure, am I safe and well to do whatever it is I'm going to do? And the compass to make sure that you have a plan and you have a direction of where you're going to go. Those are tools that we can adopt into our culture. And it's not that it would always keep you safe, but it will always keep you thinking about your personal safety. And if you're aware of it, then it may prevent you from being subjected to something. I wanted to make sure that we talked a little bit about some of the responsibilities that we have as a province through the Disability Alliance of BC. Has anybody heard of the Disability Alliance of BC?
Yeah.
So one of the things we're doing in our emergency management world is we're trying to educate our volunteers and our staff around the duty to accommodate, to make sure that people who have functional challenges can access all of our buildings. Our province has committed to an accessible BC. We've also committed to a violence-free BC. So there's initiatives going on all across the province to make sure that we're doing our very best in crime prevention and awareness. So if we have facilities, and we have a long way to go, trust me, and I'm sure you know better than any of us, but one of the things that's important is that you know it's on the agenda. So if there's things and tools and initiatives that are underway that can help your cause or promote some of the challenges that you have, educate us. Let us know what those are. And there's websites and resources set up for that. I know in the facilities that I manage, mostly it would relate to our reception centers, is making sure that accessibility. I have learned more in the last probably year around what accessible is and what disability is versus functionality. Our city has a long way to go. You know, access and accessibility are two different things I'm learning. And I know from my students, one of the projects one of them had was to move into a wheelchair for a week, just to assess, in his words, mobility and accessibility. And he said that his vulnerability increased. He didn't necessarily become impacted by fraud, but he felt that people taking the opportunity to try to defraud him increased. Whether it was at the SkyTrain station, whether it was at the 7-Eleven, or whether it was just in his community corner store. He said that he didn't feel safe in the wheelchair because he felt that he couldn't get in and out and exit and access places the way he did. So he lasted 2 days, and even then it was a struggle for him. But when he reframed the project and went back to do it, his final paper was actually very informative, and we're using it now in some of the work we're doing in our city around duty to accommodate. So it's perception, and our perceptions of safety are personal. Each of you may have a different definition of what feels safe. Somewhere between your definition and what our system and our society entitles you to, we need to bridge that gap so that you do feel safe. You have rights. You have opportunities to feel safe. And if you don't, we have a duty to help you bridge that gap and give you tools and resources to make you feel that way. So I'm not sure if all of this is kind of fitting into the bill of what you were looking for today, but I hope I've given you some ideas. And I wanted to have just a couple of minutes to hear from you. Is there something that you would like to ask me, or something you want to know more about that maybe I mentioned? Does that mean I did a really good job?
What about work-at-home students?
Okay, so as it relates to fraud and vulnerability? Okay, so that's a great one. Many of the people that I work with, including myself, have a home office. And when you think of the subjectability about fraud to working at home, why do you think our opportunity for exposure increases? Maybe because where you work is where you live? You know, we have an opportunity to feel safe when we're volunteering at the crime prevention office or the policing office, because there's lots of things to keep us safe there. But when you're working from home, your vulnerability may increase because people know where you are. You may live alone. You may have people not going to a proper mailbox, but they're coming to your front door. You may have people looking up your address, thinking it's an office, when in fact it's actually your home. Some of the things we think around, we have planning and we call them home security checks. We usually try to encourage people to have a home security check when they move into a new house. But when do you think people call us and ask us to do home security checks? After something's happened. So we're missing that opportunity to be proactive. And if you're running a business, then you need to increase that security even more. And it doesn't mean that you have to have a big, expensive skookum alarm system. It means you have to have done some assessment. What are the vulnerabilities? What are the vulnerabilities or the threats to you and your business working at home? And a lot of that can be having people come to your house. How many of you answer your door if you haven't expected anybody or you haven't invited anyone to come? So the bell rings, you answer the door. Well, maybe you need to think about, maybe I won't answer the door if I don't expect anybody. We used to put peepholes indoors so that people would feel safe, and for years and years they used them. Now some people don't even realize they have a peephole in their door. Because we've stopped talking about it, we stopped thinking about it. I do a lot of training with schools, and one of the things we do in our elementary schools is we practice with the kids evacuating in the event of an emergency. We had a gas main get knocked off in the school basement, and the janitor thought if he just stuffed something in the hose it would make the problem go away. That was not exactly what happened. And as the kids started to get sick, they realized maybe we should call 911. And I'm not sharing this story with you to make fun of these people, but what happened was, when we got there, the kids were literally single file bringing the teachers out crying out of the school. Because it was their normal behavior to get out in an emergency. They had trained and exercised that so many times they knew exactly what to do. But the teachers panicked because they saw the little ones getting sick. So training and repetitive behavior does keep us safe. You have to exercise your plans. When you use your computer, think about your safety when you turn it on. Don't question it when you think, uh-oh, should I have opened that file? Because that might be too late. So we want you to think safe, because if you think safe, the chances are, at least if something suspicious comes before you, you'll at least question it as opposed to be victimized by it. Does that help? How many of you are willing to think safe a little bit differently? Then that's a good start. Is there any other questions or anything that, yes?
I have an agency come over every day to do my personal needs.
Yes.
And a lot of times I practice turns. I'm out of practice to do a lot of damage in the house. And so we've got these people we don't know come to our house from the agency.
Yes.
They do a lot of damage in our house.
And do they have a place, a way for you to report that damage?
It's just things we notice after they leave.
Okay.
You know, there's been scratches and there's things being damaged.
Well, maybe the people who run that organization, maybe there's a manager that you could call.
They want to manage it, but
And did they come?
it's like it's a teamwork. It's like they're in it together.
And you know they might be. But we want to always come from the place of everybody's not guilty, but at least if you question them on it, then you may find that yes, they are in collusion, or someone needs to come and give you an answer about why are we getting all of this damage.
We had the supervisor come over and we expressed our concerns. And she left us more damage.
And she did more damage. The person you invited created more damage?
Yes, and she was supposed to be the supervisor.
Well, then I would think about, everybody has a manager, even the supervisors, and maybe there's things you can do to make notes or take pictures.
And we take lots of pictures.
Well, I think that's worth a discussion. I think someone needs to talk to you about that and maybe have somebody act as an advocate for you to keep on that agency, or make sure that somebody is present from the agency when the care providers come in,
Yeah.
so that there's more than one of them.
Yeah, it looks like it's more, it's not, it's only not one person because the other.
Yeah, they're changing.
And then it's the same thing,
Yeah.
where even there, and then she went to the other rooms, and then when she came out, I went to check and there's some damages, so we called the supervisor.
Well, you may want to think about how many of you have heard the message, your credit card should never go out of your sight.
Yeah.
Because you don't know what happens to it when it goes out of your sight. Let them know. You don't want them going around your apartment unless you can see them.
They're not supposed to be going there, but they're trespassing. It's like they're going to my daughter's bedroom, and they're doing them some damage. But it's like they just do it in a very quick,
Yeah.
they just go and...
Well then, and we can talk about this at the end, but there's things that we can do. Maybe they need some new rules of engagement when they come to your house. And maybe you have to get them to sign off on the rules from the agency and have somebody else present. But I'll talk to you about that just before we head out. How's that? Maybe we can come up with some ideas.
Yeah.
Because I'm conscious of the fact that you all have an agreement to be out of here at 1 o'clock, and it's almost 1. So any last input, any questions, anything I can talk more about? Or
Just a very specific question. Have you ever encountered any reason to give a credit card number to somebody who has called you that you have to contact with first?
I would not. But I'm thinking there might be times like if you booked a flight and they are calling back to say, you know what, something's wrong with your credit card number, but you would know that you planned a ticket.
You've initiated
Yeah.
that interaction.
And nowadays I would say never. There's never a good reason for that. And if there is, they can justify that to you and satisfy you that yes, this is legitimate.
Or you can always ask for a number to call them back so you can check
Yeah.
before you give out the information.
Absolutely. I would never give it, I would always call back. But then, of course, understanding people's schedules. Some of these, bless you, some of these even legitimate agencies, calling them back means you're in a hold line for 3 hours on the telephone. So sometimes people don't want to lose that connection. So again, using discretion and checking it out. All right. Well, thank you very much for listening to me. Hopefully some of the information was useful. And all of the resources that I referenced, I will provide to Fiona. And I've also got packages here for you about police victim services and the crime victim assistance applications. And it's just the cover page, but they're all available on the websites, and all the sources for the websites are on the handout. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.